Hello, my name is Judy Peters, and I'm going to be doing a second read on this book, The Mittens, adapted and illustrated by Jan Brett. So I'll be doing the second reading for this book. Okay, so I'll go ahead and start reading. Once there was a boy named Nicky. He wanted his new mittens made from wool as white as snow. At first, his grandmother, Baba, did not want to knit white mittens. If you drop one in the snow, she warned, you'll never find it. But Nicky wanted snow white mittens, and finally, Baba made them. After she finished, she said, when you come home first, I will look to see if you are safe and sound, but then I will look to see if you still have your snow white mittens. So Nicky went off. Off Nicky went, and it wasn't long until one of his new mittens dropped in the snow and was left behind. A mole, tired from tunneling along, discovered the mittens and burrowed inside. It was cozy and warm and just the right size, so he decided to stay. A snow white rabbit came hopping by. He stopped for a moment to admire his white winter coat. It was then he saw the mitten and he wiggled in feet first. The mole didn't think there was a room for both of them, but when he saw the rabbit's big kickers, he moved over. Next, a hedgehog came snuffling along, having spent the day looking under wet leaves for things to eat. He decided to move into the mitten and warm himself. The mole and the rabbit were bumped and jostled, but not being one to argue with someone covered with prickles, they made room. As soon as the hedgehog disappeared into the mitten, a big owl, attracted by the commotion, swooped down. When he decided to move in also, the rabbit and the hedgehog grumbled, but when they saw the owl's glinting talons, they quickly let him in. Up through the snow appeared a badger. He eyed the mitten and began to climb in. The mole, the rabbit, and the hedgehog, the owl, were not pleased. There was no room left, but when they saw his diggers, they gave him the thumb. It started snowing, but the animals were snug in the mitten. A whiff of warm steam rose in the air, a fox trotting by to investigate. Just the sight of the closing mitten made him drowsy. The fox poked his muzzle in. When the mole, the rabbit, the hedgehog, the owl, and the badger saw his shiny teeth, they gave the fox lots of room. A great bear lumbered by. He spied the mitten all plumped up. Not being one left out in the cold, he began to nose his way in. The animals were packed in tightly could be, but what animal could argue with a bear? The mitten swelled, stretched, it was pulled and bulged to many sizes, and Bubba's good knitting held fast. Along came a meadow mouse no bigger than an acorn. She wriggled into the one space left and made herself comfortable on top of the great bear's nose. The bear, tickled by the mouse's whiskers, gave an enormous sneeze. Chew! The force of the sneeze shot the mitten up into the sky and then scattered the animals in all directions. On his way home, Nicky saw a white shape in the distance. It was the lost mitten silhouette against the blue sky. As he ran to catch his snow white mitten, he saw Bubba's face in the window. First, she looked to see if he was safe and sound. Then she saw that he still had his new mittens. So in this story, going back to the beginning, one prompt that I would do is I would ask the students, why do you think Nicky's grandmother did not want to make white mittens? So she says that here, and then she explained, if you drop one in the snow, she warned, you'll never find it. So that's one prompt I would ask the students. One identifying point I would explain to the students is when Baba says, when you come home, first I will look to see if you are safe and sound. So I think the reason why I would explain to the students the reason why she's saying that is to make sure, he's not hurt or anything like that because of the snow, the weather. Another point I would make is vocabulary word. When the mole discovered the mitten, I would ask the student, a question is, what do you think he or she thought about that mitten, the mole? And then I would explain the word discover, which is a vocabulary word that I picked, meaning to find. So I would point that out to the student. Another vocabulary word I would explain also is here in this scene here with the owl. Well, let me go back with the owl and the 3 other animals. I would ask, what kind of sound do you think the mole, the rabbit, and the hedgehog were making to attract the owl? So I asked that kind of like a prompt. And then also I would go over the vocabulary word, which is glinting, talons. And what that means is like flash, sparkles. So I would point out, his talons here. So I would have the students think about those 2 things: is what attracted the owl, to come down and investigate, to find out what was going on with the 3 animals. And then another identifying point, number 2, is, but Baba's good knitting held fast. So maybe that's something that the students will have a hard time, understanding what does that mean, but Baba's good knitting. So I would go back to the context clue, like the mitten, even though the animals were all inside, the mitten didn't break or didn't tear. So I would explain to the students that's what it means is, it held fast, is that it was a good woven mitten that held together. So that's one identifying point right there for the students. And then another identifying point I would point out is this line here in the story. Along came a meadow mouse no bigger than an acorn. So I would explain to the students, it's comparing the size of the acorn to the mouse. And I would point to the picture here, how tiny that mouse is compared to the big bear. So I would, point that out to the students. And then at the end, I would go over the big question with the students. The big question being, how were the animals accommodating or helping each other in the story? So this is the big question I would go over in the first read, and then now in the second read. So that's what I would do with this story. Okay, thank you.